The chandeliers bathed the ballroom in a golden glow, but all I could feel was the weight of her voice slicing through the music. "How thoughtful! A gift from the bargain shelf," the CEO's fiancée said, loud enough for the nearest tables to hear. Laughter rippled among a few guests, the kind that hides behind crystal glasses and polite smiles. My fingers tightened around the small velvet box I had brought, the one I had chosen with more care than I'd ever admit. I could feel the burn rising in my cheeks, the way humiliation always announces itself. Slow at first, then merciless. For a second, I wished I could disappear into the sea of sequins and black suits. But then I caught his eyes across the crowd. The CEO was watching me, his gaze steady, unblinking, like he had just walked into the middle of a storm and wasn't afraid to stand there. He didn't look at her. He didn't even glance at the glittering guests waiting for his reaction. Instead, he began walking toward me with a pace that made the room feel suddenly smaller. I felt my breath catch, the murmur of the party dimming, as if the chandeliers themselves were holding their light back until he arrived. The entire hall fell into a silence that felt endless. The golden lights reflected on the marble floor, but the warmth of the celebration vanished for me. My face burned, as if every conversation had stopped and only the echo of the fiancée's words remained. She stood there, flawless in her embroidered white gown, still holding the bouquet I had chosen so carefully, twisting the stem between her fingers as if it were something spoiled. It wasn't just the gift she had rejected. It was the gesture, the time I had spent, the memory I had wanted to offer to them both. I wanted to answer, but no words came. Before I could retreat to the back of the hall and disappear, I saw the CEO, tall, his gaze sharp like a blade, rise from the head table. His steady footsteps echoed across the hall, and some guests subtly stepped aside. He walked straight to me, never once looking at his bride, and placed in my hands a new bouquet, fresh, perfect flowers, still dewy. "This is for you. The other doesn't deserve it." His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the silence like a public announcement. A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd. I looked at him, unsure whether to smile or cry, feeling the weight of dozens of eyes on us. The bride pressed her lips together, trying to keep her composure, but her hand trembled against the white silk. In that instant, I knew the story of that night had just changed and that every single person in that room would remember it. A slow wave of whispers spread through the hall, but the CEO didn't seem to notice, or maybe he didn't care. His hand lingered for a second on the bouquet he had just given me, the warmth of his fingers brushing against mine. The scent of the fresh flowers, roses and freesias, felt oddly like a shield, pushing away the sting of humiliation. "You didn't have to," I began, but he cut me off with a quiet, "I wanted to." That was when I saw the shift in the guests' expressions. Some looked shocked, others quietly amused, and a few even smiled, as though watching a scene from a drama they didn't expect to witness. The fiancée's jaw tightened, her knuckles pale around the bouquet she still held. Suddenly, it looked heavy in her hands. She tried to laugh, to turn the moment into a joke, but her voice trembled. The CEO stepped closer to me, his presence commanding, and raised his glass in a subtle toast. Not to the head table, not to the couple, but to me. The meaning was clear, even without words. My pulse quickened. I had come here only to offer a gift, to quietly celebrate someone else's moment. But now, standing in the center of the marble floor, I realized the evening had turned into something else entirely, a silent battle played in front of crystal chandeliers and glittering eyes. And whether I wanted it or not, I had just been placed at the heart of it. The rest of the hall seemed frozen, like someone had pressed pause on a movie. Every eye was either on me or on him, waiting for what would happen next. The music had faded into a soft background hum, and I became acutely aware of the weight of the CEO's gesture. He had not only dismissed the insult, he had replaced it with a declaration that echoed louder than any microphone. My gift, simple and from the heart, now sat in his hands as if it were the centerpiece of the night. I could still feel the burn of his fiancée's earlier words. Cheap, she'd said, the syllables sharp enough to slice through the air. But now, those same guests who had quietly smirked were leaning in, their expressions shifting from amusement to intrigue. The fiancée's eyes darted between the CEO and me, her composure slipping with every second. Somewhere in the back, champagne glasses clinked as a small group of older men whispered to each other, their eyes glittering with the kind of curiosity that spreads like wildfire in corporate circles. I wanted to step back, to melt into the crowd and pretend none of this was happening, but the CEO didn't allow it. His gaze held me there, steady and unyielding, as if to say, don't you dare look away. In that moment, I realized this wasn't just a defense, it was a statement, one that would ripple far beyond this ballroom. And I wasn't sure whether to be grateful or terrified. He didn't just hold the gift, he cradled it as though it carried a story only he understood. This, he said, his voice carrying over the quiet murmur of the crowd, isn't just a gift. It's the kind of thing you remember. The room reacted like a wave. Heads turned, eyes widened, whispers spread. The fiancée's lips tightened, her knuckles pale against the stem of her champagne flute. She looked ready to laugh it off, to smooth her embarrassment with a polished smile, but his tone left no space for dismissal. He was making it clear that her opinion didn't define the value of what I had given him. My pulse quickened. This wasn't just an act of politeness. It was deliberate, maybe even defiant. He set the gift down on the main table, in front of the floral centerpiece, and stepped closer to me. You didn't have to, he added, softer now, though his voice still carried enough for the front tables to hear. My throat felt tight, words tangled somewhere between gratitude and confusion. Why was he doing this? He could have ignored me entirely, let her comment fade into the air like so many other subtle humiliations I'd endured tonight. Instead, he had turned the moment into something none of the guests would forget. I could feel the eyes on my back, the sudden shift in how they were seeing me. And for the first time all evening, I wasn't the girl standing in the wrong dress or holding the wrong thing. I was the one the CEO had chosen to defend in front of everyone. That was dangerous and intoxicating. The moment lingered in the air, heavy and electric. His hand brushed the edge of the wrapping paper again, almost absently, but the gesture felt intentional, like he wanted the image of him holding my gift to burn itself into the memory of every guest. The fiancée tried to reclaim control, her laugh brittle as she leaned toward the nearest table, muttering something about old-fashioned taste. But no one laughed with her. Instead, they watched him, the way his shoulders squared, the subtle way he angled himself between us, as though shielding me from another jab. My heart beat faster, not from his closeness, but from the realization that his choice had shifted the room's entire mood. People who had avoided my gaze earlier now glanced at me with a kind of hesitant curiosity. And beneath it all, I could feel her resentment tightening like a wire. This wasn't just about a gift anymore. It was about defiance, about him drawing a line right there in front of everyone. I didn't know if it was meant to protect me or provoke her, but it was working. My fingers itched to retreat, to vanish into the crowd and let the moment dissolve. But his eyes caught mine, steady and unflinching. There was no escape from the attention now, no way to fade back into obscurity. Whether I liked it or not, I'd been pulled into whatever silent game he was playing, and every instinct told me this was only the beginning. Something had shifted, and it wouldn't shift back. The reception hall seemed louder now, every clink of glass and murmur of conversation pressing in like a tide I couldn't step out of. Yet, despite the noise, my focus stayed locked on him. He hadn't moved far, just a few steps toward the center of the room, but the subtle act of keeping the gift in his hand, still unwrapped, still mine, spoke louder than anything else. The fiancée followed, her heels clicking sharp against the marble floor, her bouquet trembling slightly from the grip she had on it. She was smiling, but it was the kind of smile that didn't touch her eyes, a performance for the audience that was rapidly slipping from her control. A few guests leaned closer to one another, whispering in quick, curious bursts, their glances darting between her and me like they were waiting for the next move in a chess match. I wasn't used to this kind of attention. Normally, I'd be the one to step aside, to let the room forget I was there. But now, under the pull of his gaze and the weight of everyone watching, I felt something shift inside me, an urge not to shrink away this time. The warmth from earlier was gone, replaced by a current of unease, a quiet warning in my gut that whatever game he was playing, it was far from harmless. Still, I didn't break eye contact when he glanced back at me. I couldn't tell if it was defiance, curiosity, or something else entirely, but I knew I'd just stepped into the center of a story that wasn't mine, yet somehow had my name written all over it. He stopped near the edge of the dance floor, the gift still balanced in one hand as if he had no intention of setting it down. The fiancée caught up, slipping her arm through his, her voice low but tight enough that I could hear the edge in it, even from a distance. Whatever she said made his jaw tighten. He didn't look at her. His gaze swept the room instead, finding me again, holding me there like a tether I couldn't cut. A hush rippled through the nearest tables, as if everyone sensed the tension beneath the polished surface of champagne flutes and white tablecloths. I felt my pulse climb, but I didn't move. If I left now, it would feel like surrender, and something in me refused to give her that victory. He finally turned to her, and I caught the brief flicker of something in his expression, disappointment maybe, before his lips curved into a faint, controlled smile. It wasn't the kind of smile you gave a partner. It was the kind you wore in business meetings when you'd already decided the deal was over. Without warning, he lifted the gift slightly, angling it so the light caught the wrapping, and said something that made the people around him lean in, eager to hear. Her grip on his arm faltered. I couldn't hear his words over the swell of the band, but I didn't need to. I saw the way her eyes widened, her shoulders stiffening, and then deliberately he stepped away from her, closing the distance between us with the slow, measured stride of someone who wanted every guest to watch exactly what he was about to do next. He stopped just a breath away from me, the gift between us like a silent question. The music faded into background noise, replaced by the heavy awareness of 100 eyes following every move. His cologne, sharp, clean, and threaded with something warmer, was suddenly all I could smell. For a moment, we didn't speak. He only looked at me, his gaze steady and unreadable, as if weighing something against the weight of the room's expectations. Then, in a voice pitched for everyone nearby to hear, he said, "This is the only gift I wanted tonight." Gasps rippled through the guests like wind over silk, and I felt the ground tilt beneath me. The fiancée stood frozen a few feet away, her painted smile stretched thin, her hands tightening around her own bouquet until the stems bent. He didn't glance back at her, he didn't need to. His focus stayed on me, as though my reaction was the only one that mattered. Carefully, he placed the gift in my hands, his fingers brushing mine in a way that felt deliberate, anchoring. "Keep it safe," he added softly, for me alone, though I knew curious ears strained to catch the words. The room's energy shifted, the air charged with unspoken speculation. Someone at a nearby table whispered, and another stifled a laugh. In that moment, it didn't feel like a ballroom anymore. It felt like a stage, and we were the only two actors aware of the script. My heartbeat thundered in my ears as I held the box, realizing he had just turned what began as an insult into a public declaration no one could ignore. The applause didn't start right away. It was as if the room had to collectively process what had just happened. Then a few scattered claps broke the tension, awkward at first, then growing, not out of celebration, but from the need to mask the unease that had settled over the guests. I stood frozen, clutching the gift, my mind spinning. This wasn't just about defending me from her insult. It was a statement, one he'd made in front of the most powerful people in the city. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the fiancé's father lean toward her, his lips moving quickly, his face hardening. She didn't respond. Her gaze stayed locked on us, her expression caught between disbelief and fury. The CEO, however, seemed immune to the ripples of discomfort spreading through the hall. He turned slightly, still facing me, but his voice carried outward as he said, "If you don't value sincerity, then you value nothing at all." The weight of his words hung in the air, cutting through the polite hum of background chatter. My throat tightened. I wasn't used to being the center of attention, especially not like this. Every pair of eyes in the room seemed to be measuring me now, reassessing, wondering what I meant to him. For a moment, I considered putting the gift down, retreating to the safety of anonymity. But something in his expression, steady, unwavering, kept me rooted to the spot. I realized then that walking away now would undo whatever line he had just drawn in my defense. So I lifted my chin, my fingers curling protectively around the box, and let the silence answer for me. I could feel the tension coiling tighter with every second, but he didn't let it snap. Instead, the CEO stepped closer, not enough to be inappropriate, but enough for his presence to eclipse the noise of the room. "You think I'm exaggerating?" he asked, almost conversationally, though the edge in his voice betrayed him. "This," he gestured toward the box in my hands, "is more meaningful than half the fortunes represented here tonight." His words weren't shouted, but they landed like a blow. Some guests avoided eye contact, suddenly fascinated by their glasses, while others leaned in, eager for the spectacle. The fiancée's lips pressed into a thin line, her hand tightening around the stem of her champagne flute. I wondered if she might drop it. He didn't wait for her response. "It's not about the price," he continued, his gaze unwavering. "It's about the thought. And no one thinks about me the way she does." My breath caught. He wasn't just defending me. He was dismantling the unspoken hierarchy of the room. For the first time, I saw something flicker across the fiancée's face, not just anger but fear, as though she realized she was losing control of a stage she'd always owned. I felt the weight of the moment settle over me. This wasn't a private exchange. It was a shift, the kind that changes how people see you forever. I didn't know if I was ready for it, but I knew I couldn't undo it. So I stood there, still holding the gift, aware that every word he spoke was rewriting my place in the story, whether I wanted it or not. The room seemed to exhale all at once, a soft murmur rippling through the crowd. I could feel eyes on me, not the dismissive glances from before, but something heavier, sharper, as if they were reevaluating every assumption they'd made about who I was. The CEO took the box from my hands with a gentleness that contrasted the steel in his voice moments earlier. He opened it in front of everyone, revealing the small, handcrafted frame I'd spent weeks working on, its edges carved with the skyline from his hometown. A collective hush fell. Even those farthest from us leaned in to see. "This," he said, turning the frame so the light caught its polished surface, "is my favorite gift tonight, and it's the only one that will sit on my desk." His declaration left no room for rebuttal. The fiancée's painted smile didn't reach her eyes, and I watched her fingers flex, the knuckles pale. For the first time, I realized her discomfort wasn't just about me, it was about the shift in his attention. My pulse quickened. I wasn't here to compete, yet the weight of his words placed me in the center of a storm I hadn't planned to stand in. He caught my gaze briefly, an unspoken reassurance passing between us, before turning to address the guests as if nothing had happened. But everything had changed. The balance in the room was no longer hers to command. I clutched the empty space where the gift had been, unsure whether to feel proud, terrified, or both. And somewhere in the quiet of my own thoughts, I knew this moment would not be forgotten by anyone in that room. The evening should have moved on, but it didn't. Every clink of cutlery, every polite laugh around the tables felt slightly off, as though the air hadn't recovered from what just happened. I stayed at the edge of the hall, trying to disappear into the background. Yet my presence was now impossible to ignore. Across the room, the fiancée whispered something sharp to a cluster of her friends, their eyes darting toward me before quickly looking away. The CEO, however, remained in the center, speaking with the board members and investors, the frame I had gifted him tucked securely under his arm like a personal treasure. At one point, his gaze drifted over the heads in the room until it found mine, and in that fleeting second, it felt like the entire noise around us dimmed. He didn't smile, not exactly, but there was a quiet conviction in his expression that said more than any reassurance could. My fingers tightened around my clutch, the urge to leave battling with an equally strong pull to see what would happen next. I could feel the narrative in this room shifting, not just between him and his fiancée, but between him and me. Guests were starting to approach, some under the guise of casual conversation, others with thinly veiled curiosity, wanting to know more about the woman with the favorite gift. I answered politely, but my mind kept circling back to the same thought. This night had begun with humiliation, but it was no longer unfolding on their terms. Something was building, and I wasn't sure if I was ready for the next blow or the next revelation. The subtle buzz of conversation suddenly dipped when the CEO set his drink aside and began walking toward me. His strides were unhurried but deliberate, the kind that made people step back without him having to say a word. The frame was still in his hand, the spotlight of the chandelier catching on the glass. "Walk with me," he said quietly, but it carried enough weight that nearby guests instinctively turned to watch. My heart thudded in my chest as I followed him, weaving between the tables toward the far end of the hall. His fiancée's eyes followed too, narrowing like she was trying to calculate exactly what this meant. We stopped near the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city lights sprawling behind him like an unspoken metaphor. He lifted the frame slightly, looking at it as if replaying the moment I gave it to him. "They'll talk," he said at last, his voice lower, more personal. "But they'll also remember who gave me something worth more than its price tag." For a heartbeat, I couldn't find words, caught between disbelief and the strange steadiness in his tone. I glanced over my shoulder and saw the way the guests were watching us now, not with the same pity they'd had earlier, but with curiosity, maybe even respect. Somewhere in that shift, I realized the evening had turned into something entirely different than the humiliation I'd braced for. Whatever came next, it would not be defined by her insult, but by this moment he'd just given me in full view of everyone, and I had the sense that was exactly his intention. When we reached the marble staircase, he stopped and turned so we were facing the room again. The music had resumed, but I could feel the weight of 100 unspoken questions hanging in the air. He raised the frame slightly, just enough for the closest tables to see, and said in a voice calm yet unyielding, "This is my favorite gift tonight, and it's from her." The word "her" landed like a quiet challenge, and though he didn't look at his fiancée, the implication was crystal clear. A few people exchanged glances. Others quickly found the floor fascinating. I could almost hear the shift, the silent rewriting of the story they'd all assumed when she dismissed me earlier. He didn't give them time to recover, either. With a small smile meant only for me, he added, "It stays in my office, right where I'll see it every day." My chest tightened, not from embarrassment now, but from the unexpected warmth of being seen and defended in such a deliberate, public way. For the first time that evening, I felt the knot of humiliation in my stomach loosen, replaced by something steadier. When he offered his arm, I hesitated only a moment before taking it. The whispers would continue long after tonight, I knew, but they would carry a different tone, one she hadn't intended. As we walked back toward the center of the room, I caught my reflection in the glass of the frame. I didn't look like the outsider anymore. I looked like someone whose presence had just been marked as unshakably important in the very place I'd been told I didn't belong. And maybe, just maybe, that was the most valuable gift exchanged tonight.